The silence in my grandmother's house was a physical presence, thick with dust and memories. It had been a week since the funeral, and the task of clearing out her life felt like a monumental intrusion. My mother, Sarah, pragmatic and brittle with grief, had taken the kitchen, so I was left with the attic, a place I had loved as a child, a realm of forgotten treasures and imagined adventures. It was fair, tucked inside a rusting metal lockbox that smelled of old paper and cedar, that I found the diary. It was bound in faded green leather, the pages soft and foxed with age. My grandmother's name, Eleanor, was embossed on the cover in flaking gold leaf. I remember smiling, a sad, fond gesture. I'd known Eleanor as a woman of quiet routine, of knitted blankets and perfectly steeped tea. The idea of her keeping a diary felt strangely dramatic. Curled in the worn velvet of her reading chair, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the room, I began to read. The early entries were from 1958, when she was 20. They were filled with the youthful anxieties of a post-war world. Dreams of university, gentle rebellions against her parents, and tedious descriptions of local boys her mother insisted she court. They spoke of a life I recognized: bake sales, church socials, the stifling comfort of a small town where everyone knew your name and your business. And then, in the spring of 1959, the entries changed. The ink seemed darker, the handwriting more fluid, as if the very act of writing had become a desperate, vital release. April 12th, 1959. The world has colors today I never knew existed. The cherry blossoms on Elm Street are a riot of pink against a sky so blue it hurts to look at. And him, Professor Alistair Finch, he spoke today, not just about Keats, but about the ache of beauty, the silent language of a yearning heart. He stood before the class, a young man himself, really, with dark hair that fell across his brow and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He read from Endymion, and when he spoke the line, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever," his gaze swept the room and landed on me. Just for a second, I felt he was speaking only to me. It is a foolish, dangerous thought, but it is mine. My breath caught. Professor Finch? I knew that name. He was a legend in our small college town, a man who had taught literature for 40 years and whose name was on a building. I had a vague memory of a stooped, white-haired figure being honored at a town ceremony when I was a child. To think of him as a young man, vibrant and intense, and my grandmother as his enraptured student, sent a strange shiver down my spine. This wasn't the grandmother who taught me how to knead dough. This was a girl on the precipice of a great, terrifying passion. The entries that followed were a slow, burning crescendo of forbidden love. It was never explicit, never sordid. It was in the lingering glances after class, the way his hand would almost brush hers when returning a paper, the discussions about poetry that stretched long after the other students had left. She wrote of his mind, his passion for words, his deep melancholy eyes that seemed to hold a universe of sorrow she longed to understand. May 3rd, 1959. He mentioned Baudelaire today, The Flowers of Evil. Mother would faint dead away if she knew. He speaks of Parisian boulevards and the beauty and decay as if he's walked those very streets. When I asked him after class if he'd ever been, he smiled a sad, private smile and said, "Only in my dreams, Miss Carter. Only in my dreams." He called me Miss Carter, but the way he said it felt like a caress. I am falling into a world I never knew was there, and I have no desire to climb out. The secrecy was a drug in itself. She wrote of the thrill of passing him on the street, of their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second, a spark of shared knowledge in a town of blissful ignorance. She described his wife, Helen, from a distance, a pale, elegant woman who seemed to float beside him at college functions, a ghost at their feast. She is like a beautiful vase, cracked and carefully glued back together. He looks at her with a protective guilt that breaks my heart, even as I envy her place at his side. Then came the first meeting outside of class. May 25th, 1959. We met by the old stone bridge at sunset. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my chest. He was already there, leaning against the mossy stone, his jacket slung over his shoulder. He didn't touch me. We just walked, and the air between us was electric, alive. He recited Donne. She is all states and all princes I. The way he looked at me, as if I contained entire kingdoms. I am lost. I am found. What am I to do? He is married. A wife who is kind and fragile, he says. A life built that feels to him like a beautifully illustrated prison. I'm the key, and I am terrified to turn. I read on, my heart pounding as if I was the one living the secret. The affair blossomed through the summer of 1959. It was a season stolen from time. Stolen afternoons in a secluded meadow she called their secret garden, where the world was reduced to the buzz of bees, the scent of clover, and the sound of his voice reading Shelley. Clandestine meetings in his campus office after dark, the room lit only by a green-shaded lamp, the world outside forgotten. July 18th, 1959. He kissed me today. It was not like the clumsy, wet kisses of the boys from town. It was a question and an answer. It was a poem. His lips were soft, but there was a desperate hunger in them, a hunger that echoed my own. When we pulled apart, he rested his forehead against my head, his breath warm on my face. "Eleanor," he whispered, and my name had never sounded so beautiful. What are we doing? I had no answer. I only knew that to stop would be to cease living. The diary was no longer just a record. It was a living thing. I could feel the sun of that long-ago summer on my skin, the crushing weight of their secret, the exquisite pain of a love that could only exist in shadows. She described the gifts he gave her, not jewels, but books. A first edition of Elizabeth Browning Boning's Sonnets from the Portuguese, inscribed with only the date. A single, perfect white rose. But as the summer began to wane, so did the dream. The entries became frantic, scared. The poetry was edged with fear. September 10th, 1959. I am with child. The world which had been so bright has shrunk to the single terrifying fact. I told him today in our meadow, the hope in his eyes, the hope for us, was extinguished so quickly, replaced with a fear I have never seen in him. He spoke of ruin, of scandal, of his career, of his wife's delicate constitution. He said we must be practical. He has arranged for a doctor in the city, a man who can solve the problem. The word made me ill. I feel the child, a secret of my own, a flicker of life that is part him and part me. How can it be a problem? How can our love lead to this? I put the diary down, my hands trembling. My grandmother, pregnant with Professor Finch's child. The math was brutal and immediate. My mother, Sarah, was born in June of 1960. The air left my lungs. My mother, her entire life, her identity, was built on a lie. The man I had known as my grandfather, Arthur, a kind but quiet and emotionally remote man who had died when I was young, was not her biological father. Eleanor had married him quickly, quietly in the winter of 1959. It had always been spoken of as a whirlwind romance, a sudden infatuation. Now I knew the truth. It was a necessity, a cover story, a life raft. I kept reading, now with a dreadful, consuming urgency. The entry after her meeting with Alistair about the doctor was scribbled, the ink blotted with tears. September 15th, 1959. I cannot. I looked at the train ticket he gave me, the address of that man, and I knew I could not go. This child is all that is left of the truth of us. It is the living proof that what we had was real. I told him my decision. He was silent for a long time, his face a mask of anguish. Then he said, "Then we must part, Eleanor. Forever. For both our sakes, and for the child's. It is over. The great love of my life, extinguished not by a lack of feeling, but by its consequences. I am alone." The subsequent entries were brief, stark records of her survival. November 5, 1959. Arthur Millow proposed today. I said yes. There was no poetry, no fire. It was a chronicle of a life being meticulously, painfully rebuilt. She wrote of the wedding, a small, somber affair. She wrote of moving into Arthur's tidy, impersonal house. She wrote of her parents' relief. Then, after my mother's birth, a single poignant line. June 5, 1960. She has his eyes. The diary ended there. The rest of the pages were blank. It was as if the woman who wrote those passionate, desperate words had ceased to exist, replaced by the grandmother I knew. A woman who loved me deeply, but who always seemed to have a part of herself locked away in a place no one could reach, a secret garden of her own that had long since gone to seed. I sat in the gathering darkness, the diary heavy in my lap. The secret was immense, a seismic truth that had just rearranged the entire geography of my family's history. I thought of my mother, of her lifelong faint dissatisfaction, her sometimes difficult relationship with Eleanor that she could never quite explain. She always seemed disappointed in me, Sarah had once told me, her voice laced with the child's enduring confusion. Now I understood. It wasn't disappointment. It was a constant, painful reminder of the man she truly loved, staring back at her from her daughter's face. But the final piece, the one that truly explained everything, was yet to come. Driven by a need for answers, by a need to know his heart, I went back to the attic. I sifted through every box, every pile of letters, until I found it. Tucked inside an old, worn copy of Keats's poetry, its spine cracked from use, was a single folded letter, brittle at the creases. It was not in my grandmother's hand. The script was elegant, flowing, but with a shaky urgency that suggested age or powerful emotion. My dearest Eleanor, I write this knowing you may never read it, but I must set the words free, or they will consume me. They told me you had a child, a daughter. I have done the arithmetic of my torment 1,000 times. She is mine. I see her sometimes from a distance, walking with you in the park. She has your smile, but she has my mother's brow, the same curve to her cheek. It is a special kind of hell to see your own flesh and blood and be a stranger to it. My life has been a long atonement for my cowardice. When you needed my courage, I offered you only fear. I chose the safety of my reputation and my duty over the truth of our love, and I have lived with that regret every day since. Helen and I never had children. The doctor said it was her, but in my heart, I always believed it was my punishment. It was a quiet, empty marriage until her passing last year. A fitting punishment, I suppose, for a man who valued silence over truth. The love I felt for you, Eleanor, was not a youthful indiscretion. It was the defining passion of my life. Everything I taught, every poem I ever loved, led you to you and found its meaning in you. You were the secret heart of my world. And in letting you go, I lost my own. I became a ghost in my own life, lecturing on passion and beauty while my own heart turned to dust. If you can find it in your heart, please tell our daughter about me. Not the pathetic old man I became, but the man who loved you beneath the cherry blossoms, the man who saw all states, all princes in you. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her that not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you, of her. Yours always, Alistair. The date on the letter was 1995. My mother would have been 35. I remembered that year. It was when Professor Finch, the revered elderly academic, had passed away. He had died alone, a widower, his legacy, his books, and his renamed lecture hall. And I remembered my grandmother's reaction to the news. She had been quiet for days, withdrawn into a deep, private grief we had all attributed to her general thoughtfulness for the town's esteemed scholar. She had taken a single long walk to the old stone bridge and had come back with red-rimmed eyes. Now I knew. She was mourning the man who had written this, the father of her child, the great love she had buried for a lifetime. She was mourning the final, irrevocable end of their story. I held the proof in my hands, the forbidden love, the secret, the lifelong consequences. It explained the subtle distance I sometimes felt between my grandmother and my mother, not a lack of love, but the weight of an untold story. It explained my grandmother's occasional uncharacteristical melancholy, her faraway look when certain poems were read on the radio. It explained why my mother for all her life had felt a strange disconnect from the man she called father, a quiet sense of not quite belonging that she could never name. Now the weight of this truth was mine. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was now filled with the echoes of a forbidden love that 60 years later was finally demanding to be heard. The ghosts were no longer in the attic. They were in this very room, their long silenced voices a-roaring in my ears. And I was the only one who could hear them. The diary and the letter lay on my coffee table, side by side. The faded green leather and the brittle white paper seemed to pulse with a dangerous energy, like a dormant heart that had suddenly begun to beat again. In the weeks since I'd found them, my grandmother's house had transformed from a place of quiet mourning into a prison of my own conscience. Every room was now a backdrop to the secret I carried. I'd see my grandmother's face in the old photographs on the mantelpiece, the kind, wrinkled smile, the eyes that had always seemed to hold a gentle secret, and now I knew its terrifying, beautiful depth. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a gnawing, relentless anxiety. What was I supposed to do with this? The knowledge felt like a corrosive acid inside me, eating away at my own memories, my understanding of our family's history. My mother, Sarah, wasn't who I thought she was. The quiet, dependable Arthur, whose framed photo sat on her dresser, was a stand-in, a gracious and unknowing cuckold. Her true father was a ghost, a brilliant, cowardly poet who had loved and failed her before she even drew her first breath. I tried to rationalize silence. She's in her 60s. Her life is set. What good would it do to shatter her world? To tell her the mother she just buried lived a fundamental lie her entire life? This was the path of protection, of allowing the generations-old secret to die with me, as it should have died with Eleanor. It was the kindest option, surely. But then I'd pick up Alistair's letter. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her that not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you, of her. His plea, penned in the twilight of his life, felt like a direct charge. He had died burdened by his silence. My grandmother lived and died burdened by hers. Was it now my eternal burden to carry it for them? To deny my mother the truth of her own origin? The weight of it was crushing. I felt like the designated keeper of a haunted archive, and the ghost was demanding to be let out. I needed an outside perspective, a sounding board for my splintering conscience. I called my best friend Maya. "You have to tell her," she said immediately, her voice firm through the phone. We were sitting on her back porch, and I'd laid out the entire staggering story. "It's her right to know. This is her identity, Liam. It's the missing piece of her entire life. Think about it. Hasn't she always seemed a little unmoored?"
I flinched at the accuracy. She had. My mother was a practical, capable woman, but there was always a faint melancholy, a sense of not quite fitting into the narrative of her own life. She loved Arthur, but she spoke of him with a detached fondness, never with the deep, visceral connection some daughters have with their fathers. "Or," Maya continued, seeing my conflict, "you could just not. You could burn it all. What good comes from this? It's a bomb. You'll be blowing up her memory of both her parents. For what? To satisfy the conscience of a dead man who didn't have the guts to be a father when it mattered?" She leaned forward, her expression softening. "I'm just saying, kindness sometimes means letting sleeping dogs lie." Her husband, Ben, overheard and chimed in from the kitchen doorway. "I'm with Maya on the don't tell part. That's a world of hurt you're opening up. She's grieving her mother. This will feel like losing her all over again and losing the father she thought she had. It's a lot to unload on someone." Their conflicting advice mirrored the war in my own head. Right versus kindness. Truth versus peace. There was no clear path, only a choice between two different kinds of pain. Driven by a need to feel closer to the ghost at the center of this, I did something I hadn't planned. I drove to the college. It was a bright, crisp afternoon, the kind of day Eleanor had written about. Students lounged on the grass, laughing, their lives full of open futures, not secrets that would span decades. I found my way to Finch Hall. The building was modern, a donation from his estate, but the lecture hall that bore his name was old, with dark wood and tiered seating. It was empty. I slipped inside and sat in a creaking wooden chair at the back. The air was still, smelling of chalk dust and old books. I tried to imagine him here, young and passionate, his stormy eyes scanning the room, landing on a young woman with intelligent eyes and a heart ready for poetry. I could almost hear his voice echoing through time, reciting Donne. "She is all states and all princes, I." In this room, their story had begun. In this room, I felt the full, tragic weight of it. He wasn't just a name in a letter anymore. He was a presence. The decision crystallized for me there, in the silence of his lecture hall. Keeping this secret was no longer an act of protection. It was an act of cowardice, a continuation of the same silence that had poisoned 2 lives. My mother deserved to know why she had always felt like a stranger in her own skin. She deserved an explanation for the quiet sorrow that had always hung between her and her mother. It was her truth. I was just the messenger. The following Sunday, I invited her over for dinner. I cooked her favorite meal, a roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, but the familiar, comforting smells did nothing to calm the frantic beating of my heart. She seemed lighter than she had in weeks, chatting about a friend from her book club, admiring a new plant I'd bought. Every laugh, every casual remark felt like an accusation. I was about to take the woman she was today and break her into 1,000 pieces. After dinner, we moved to the living room with cups of tea. The diary and letter were on the side table, hidden under a magazine. My palms were slick with sweat. "You're quiet tonight, Liam," she said, settling into the armchair. "Is everything okay? Work stressing you out?" This was it. The point of no return. No, Mom, it's not work. I took a shaky breath. I found something in Grandma's attic. Her expression shifted to gentle curiosity. Oh, what was it? More of those hideous vases she loved so much? No. I reached over and slowly slid the green leather diary out from under the magazine. I held it in my hands for a moment, this Pandora's box, then held it out to her. It's her diary, from 1958-1959. Her face softened into a sad smile. Oh my, little Eleanor keeping a diary. That's so sweet. I can't imagine it's very exciting. Her life was so ordinary. It wasn't, I said, my voice tight. It really wasn't. I opened it to the first page with Eleanor's name. You should read it. Start around April of 1959. A faint line of confusion appeared between her brows. Now? You want me to read it now? Please, Mom, it's important. She gave me a long, searching look, then, with a slight shrug, took the diary. She adjusted her reading glasses and began to read. I watched her face, my heart hammering against my ribs. For the first few minutes, it was just fond curiosity. Then I saw the change. Her posture stiffened. Her thumb, which had been gently stroking the page, stilled. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly when she read the name Professor Alistair Finch. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of pages. The air grew thick, charged. She read on, her face becoming a mask of intense concentration, but I could see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. She read about the meetings by the bridge, the stolen afternoons, the poetry. I could see a faint rush rise on her cheeks, embarrassment or perhaps a dawning horror. Then she reached the entry from September 10th, 1959. I am with child. Her face lost all its color. She stared at the page, her eyes scanning the same sentence over and over again. Her hand trembled, making the diary shake. Mom? I said softly. She didn't look up. Her voice was a thin, strained wire. What is this, Liam? It's the truth. Keep reading. She read the final entries, the desperate decision, the marriage to Arthur. When she read the last line, she has his eyes, she slowly, very slowly, closed the book. She took off her glasses and placed them neatly on the table beside her. She looked at me, and her eyes were wide, uncomprehending. This is a story, she whispered. It's some novel she was writing, a fantasy. It's not a story, Mom. I picked up Alistair's letter. My hand was shaking so badly the paper rattled. No! Please, read it. It took her a full minute to reach out and take it from me. She unfolded it with painstaking slowness. As she read, her body seemed to collapse in on itself. She shrunk into the chair. A small, choked sound escaped her lips when she read, "She has your smile, but she has my mother's brow." When she finished, she let the letter fall into her lap. She stared straight ahead, at nothing. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It was a void, a vacuum sucking all the air out of the room.
Mom, say something. She turned her head toward me, and the look in her eyes was one of such pure, unadulterated devastation that I felt my own soul shrivel. All my life, she began, her voice a ragged tear in the silence. All my life, I felt it. I felt that Arthur, that I was a disappointment to him, that I was a problem he never quite knew how to solve. The words started tumbling out faster, laced with a rising hysteria. And she would look at me sometimes with such a sad look. I thought it was because I wasn't pretty enough, or clever enough, or something enough. I spent 60 years wondering what was wrong with me. Tears began to stream down her face. Not gentle tears, but angry, scalding ones. And there was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with them. They lied to me. My whole life, my entire life has been a lie. Her voice rose to a wrenching sob. Who am I? Tell me, Liam. Who the hell am I? She stood up abruptly, the letter fluttering to the floor. She paced the room, running her hands through her hair, her body shaking with violent tremors. All those times she told me to be careful, to be good, to not make a scene, and she couldn't say the word. She stopped and pointed a trembling finger at the diary. She was having an affair with her married professor. She was Then the anger turned on me. Her eyes, his eyes, blazed with a pain so raw it was physical. And you, why did you have to go digging? Why did you have to show me this? I was happy. I was grieving my mother, but I had my memories. And you've poisoned all of them. You've taken her away from me all over again. Her words were a knife to my heart. I had prepared for her grief, but not her wrath. She wanted you to know, I said weakly, gesturing to the letter. He begged her to tell you. I don't care what he wanted, she screamed, her voice cracking. He was a coward. They were both cowards. And now I'm the daughter of cowards. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. I have to go. I can't be here. Mom, wait. Please don't drive like this. Don't tell me what to do, she snapped, shoving her feet into her shoes. She yanked the door open and turned back for one last searing look. The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. You should have buried this with her. And then she was gone. The slam of the door echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I stood alone in the devastating silence, surrounded by the ghosts I had unleashed. The diary and letter lay on the floor where they had fallen, inert now, their secret finally spent. But the cost was laid bare before me. In my quest for truth, I had shattered the one person I had wanted to protect. I had wanted to give her answers, but all I had given her was a wound that at 60 years old might never heal. The truth was out, but it felt less like a liberation and more like a nuclear winter, freezing and barren, with no sign of spring. The days after the confrontation bled into one another, a monochrome landscape of guilt and silence. My mother, Sarah, didn't answer my calls, my texts, "How are you? Please, can we talk?" were met with a void. The silence was a punishment I deserved, a constant reminder of the bomb I had detonated in the center of her life. I replayed her final, shattered expression on a loop, the words, "You should have buried this with her," becoming a cursed mantra. I had been so convinced of the righteousness of truth, but I had failed to comprehend its destructive power. After a week of agonizing radio silence, I drove to her house. The curtains were drawn, and her car was in the driveway. I knocked softly, then harder, my heart thudding against my ribs. "Mom, it's Liam. I'm not leaving until I know you're okay." After a long minute, the lock clicked. The door opened just a crack, revealing a sliver of her face. She looked decades older. Her eyes were swollen and shadowed, her skin pale. The vibrant, pragmatic woman I knew had been replaced by a ghost, haunted and hollow. "I'm alive, if that's what you mean," she said, her voice flat and drained of all emotion. "Can I come in, just for a minute?" She hesitated, then sighed, opening the door wider before retreating into the dim living room. The house was unnaturally still and tidy, as if all life had been vacuumed out of it.
She sat in her armchair, pulling a knitted blanket around her shoulders despite the warm day. "I'm so sorry, Mom," I began, my voice thick. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I never meant to destroy you," she finished, her gaze fixed on the cold fireplace. "I know you didn't, but you did." She finally looked at me, and the raw pain in her eyes was almost too much to bear. "Do you have any idea what this past week has been like? It's like I've been falling down a bottomless well. Everything I thought was solid, my childhood, my parents, my own name, it was all just a fiction, a cover story." This was the core of it. It wasn't just anger, it was a fundamental disintegration of self. "I keep thinking about Arthur," she continued, her voice trembling for the first time. "That good, simple man. Did he know? Was his life a lie too? Or was he just another kind, duped soul? I look at his picture and I don't know whether to pity him or thank him or hate him for not being my real father." She wrapped the blanket tighter. "And my mother. God, Liam, I've gone through every memory. That time I asked her why I had such dark eyes when hers were blue, and she just changed the subject. The way she'd get quiet and distant on certain spring days, I thought it was just her mood. Now I know she was probably thinking of him." This was the unraveling I had anticipated, but hearing it from her was 1,000 times worse. She was dissecting her entire life with a new, brutal scalpel, and every cut revealed a fresh layer of pain. "I don't know who I am," she whispered, echoing her outburst from the night of the revelation. "Sarah, daughter of Arthur and Eleanor. It's a sentence that means nothing now." We sat in the heavy quiet for a long time. There was nothing I could say to fix it. The damage was done. All I could do was be present in the wreckage. Then something shifted. A week later, she called me. Her voice was different, not healed, but purposeful. "I want to see him," she said without preamble. "See who?" "Alistair Finch. I've been to the library. I found a book of his literary criticism. I want to go to his grave." And so, on a gray, drizzling afternoon, we found ourselves in the town cemetery, standing before a simple, elegant headstone. It read, "Alistair Finch, beloved husband of Helen, scholar and teacher." The proximity to Helen's grave, the public declaration of his life, felt like a final cruel joke. My mother stood motionless, staring at the cold granite. She didn't cry. Her hands were shoved deep into her coat pockets. "Beloved husband," she read aloud with a bitter irony. "He loved my mother. He wrote that she was the defining passion of his life." She knelt down, ignoring the wet grass, and traced the letters of his name with a gloved finger. "But he loved his reputation more. He loved this stone more." She stayed there for a long time, communing with the ghost. I saw her shoulders begin to shake, and I thought the tears would finally come. But when she stood up, her face was set in a mask of grim resolve. "He doesn't get my tears," she said quietly. "Not yet." This visit marked the beginning of a new, obsessive phase. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a desperate need to know. We became detectives of our own history. We went back to the college archives, this time together. A helpful young librarian, intrigued by our family research project, brought us a box of Alistair's unpublished papers and personal effects donated after his death. It was there, in a folder marked Personal Notes, that we found them. A series of sonnets written in his distinct, elegant hand. They were untitled, but each was dated. The one from 1975 was particularly devastating. I saw our daughter in the market square, a woman grown, with laughter in her face. I stood a ghost and could but stand and stare upon my own, my unacknowledged grace. Her mother's smile, my own mother's brow, a living portrait of my secret sin.
I made a silent, solitary vow to love the ghost of what might yet have been. My mother read the poem, her hand flying to her mouth. This was no longer the abstract man who loved her mother. This was a father watching her, knowing her, and etching his pain into verse. The anger in her eyes softened, replaced by a profound, bewildering sorrow. "It's real," she breathed. "It was all real. His regret was real." We found more. Notes for lectures where his analysis of forbidden love in Wuthering Heights or The Scarlet Letter felt too personal, too raw. A dried, pressed cherry blossom, identical to the one I'd found in Eleanor's diary, tucked between the pages of a book. They were two halves of a whole, their love documented in parallel, never to meet again. This shared quest began to rebuild the bridge I had burned. We weren't just mother and son anymore. We were fellow travelers in a land of ghosts, piecing together a puzzle that defined us both. The truth was no longer a weapon I had wielded against her. It was a burden we now carried together. The final piece of our journey took us back to the old stone bridge. It was still there, mossy and enduring. We stood where Eleanor and Alistair had once stood, where their world had changed forever. "I'm not angry at you anymore, Liam," my mother said, her eyes on the flowing water below. "How could I be? You were just the messenger. You gave me the answer to a question I've been asking my whole life, even if I never knew how to phrase it." She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of peace in her eyes, the stormy finch eyes she had finally claimed as her own. "It doesn't fix everything," she continued. "I'll always be sad for Arthur. I'll always be hurt by my mother's silence. And I'll always wonder what it would have been like to have a father with the courage to claim me." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "But I understand now. I understand the weight she carried. I understand the prison he lived in. Their love was real, and so was their fear. And I am the product of both." This was the new inheritance, not just a story of betrayal, but a story of immense, complicated love and tragic sacrifice. It was a legacy of resilience, Eleanor's resilience in building a life from the ashes, and now Sarah's resilience in rebuilding her identity from the truth. A few days later, we visited Eleanor's grave. It was a bright, sunny day, a stark contrast to our visit to Alistair's. My mother laid a bouquet of white roses, his favorite, according to the diary, on the grass. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she knelt down and placed a hand on the cool headstone. "I know your secret now, Mom," she whispered, her voice clear and steady. "And I understand. I forgive you. And I thank you for choosing me, for giving me life even when it was the hardest choice." She stood up, linking her arm through mine. The weight of 60 years seemed to lift from her shoulders, if only a little. The secret was no longer a ghost in the walls. It was a story, a painful, beautiful, and finally complete story that was now a part of us. We were no longer just a family. We were a living testament to a forbidden love that, after 60 decades, had finally found its voice.